Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us. Welcome to our existing subscribers and those of you who are, I'm sure, soon to be subscribers or just readers. My name is Murad Hemmadi. I'm a reporter and one of the Ottawa correspondents here at The Logic. The Logic is an independent news publication that reports on Canadian business and tech, covering everything from EVs to crypto and a few other things in between. In addition to our reporting and our daily newsletter, subscribers also get exclusive access to monthly insider events, company sentiment analysis, community surveys, our Slack channel, and job postings. We're going to have what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating discussion about AI. And for those of you who are not bots, which I'm hoping is all of you, I encourage you to ask questions throughout the conversation. I'll try to weave them into our panelists. You can do that in the chat or under the question section at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible through our discussion. I'd also like to thank our partner, BMO, for making this event possible. And to start us off, joining us from BMO to provide opening remarks is Raphael Schapiro, Chief Technology and Operations Strategy and Transformation Officer at BMO Financial Group. In this role, he works to set out BMO's technology transformation strategy, including the shift to modernized technologies and the domain way of working. Rafe joined BMO in 2010, and most of his time at BMO has been within T&O, along with two roles with the business as head of customer care products within the customer contact center, where he led a large technology transformation, and as a program manager within North American commercial banking. So, Rafe, take it away.
Thank you very much, Murad. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raphael Schapiro. I've been a subscriber of The Logic from the very beginning. When I'm not reading The Logic, I work at BMO Financial Group in the technology group. And very happy for BMO to be sponsoring this discussion today, Hype or Disruptor. Banks are cognitive enterprises. So we make thousands of decisions every day, whether to give credit, how to price, whether to let a customer log in with their card, how to spot financial crimes, how to prevent intrusions into our environment, how to run a large technology infrastructure. So AI holds great promise for businesses like ours, but in between the immense promise of the future and excitement today is some form of gritty execution and linking technologies together, working within risks, protecting data, and making business cases is not so easy. For us, AI exists within our strategy rather than an end in itself. We're working on putting the foundational elements in place right now, especially cloud, and our data in cloud will allow us to accelerate as we develop more use cases. Many of our use cases are things that you as customers wouldn't be able to directly see. We think that there's great fanfare on the chat part of ChatGPT, but many of our use cases have been behind the scenes. And personally, that's where I think there's less hype and potentially less focus, but also a much more incremental path that gets us somewhere exciting, falls short of dramatic disruption. I'm not qualified, though, to make any bold predictions. I'm hoping today for a more grounded conversation around use cases and how people are bringing this to life in concrete ways. Really excited to see the quality of the panelists, looking forward to hearing their views and also your questions. Murad, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Rafe. So there, we've already had our first ChatGPT mention, I wanted to start by just sort of setting the scene here a little bit. So, in November 2022, the world changed, or at least that is what you might think if you read the many PR pitches I get in my inbox, or the LinkedIn posts that I'm sure a lot of you are seeing on your networks, or increasingly we're hearing it on earnings calls. But generative AI, which is kind of what the field, if you will, of ChatGPT, getting these large language models to produce text that can be used in various ways. That is not where AI starts, and it's certainly not where it ends. And we're going to get into some of that today, but we're also going to talk about other applications, some of which long predate these models. Now, one of the interesting things here is obviously Canada has this history where at least two of the people that did a lot of the foundational work on the large language model side, specifically Jeff Hinton and Joshua Bengio, are based in Canada, in Toronto and Montreal, respectively. There are lots of other researchers who are not necessarily known by name in the same way. And they helped set up this industry in some ways with the discoveries that they made. They are also now sounding notes of caution about it. Coming, it should be said, after researchers in the field, including a lot of women, people of color, have been raising issues for several years now. So there's a lot going on, but that's about as much talking as I intend to do through this process, because that's what we have our panelists for. So joining us today are three fantastic speakers. Ryan Ferguson is the CEO of Riskfuel, prior to starting which he was managing director and head of securitization, credit derivatives, and XVA at Scotiabank. Riskfuel harnesses AI to produce ultra-fast versions of the proprietary software that banks and insurance companies use to value and risk manage their portfolios of financial instruments. John Weigelt is National Technology Officer of Microsoft Canada, where he leads strategic policy and technology efforts. He helps individuals and organizations across Canada innovate with technology while avoiding the unintended consequences that might arise. And finally, Thériault is Vice President of Legal Vice President of Legal and Chief Information Security Officer and Data Privacy Officer at Coveo. Anne joined Coveo in 2014 as legal counsel and was promoted to Senior Director of Legal in January 2020. She's held the position of Vice President of Legal since January 2021 and was given the additional titles of CISO and DPO in June 2022. She's responsible for making sure customers see value in their application of AI. So please join me on this virtual stage and let's get going. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. And I wanted to start with you because, I was just talking about this. AI didn't start last year, and Coveo has been selling functional AI for, I believe it's a decade. 2013 is the official kickoff point. What kinds of applications have your clients adopted?
Yeah, thanks, Murad. So you said it right. Coveo has been in machine learning and deep learning for more than a decade now. 2012 should be the right year. So we've also been powering search, enterprise search in 2005. And even before AI was a buzzword, we were starting to assemble large teams in this field, specifically in the areas of customer service intelligence and commerce intelligence. In fact, today, 40% of our workforce works in R&D. So this vision and early investment in AI has allowed Coveo to accelerate the application of AI platforms for enterprises, helping customers like Bass Pro, Dell, Louis Vuitton personalize and generate profits for every experience at scale. With Gen AI, we believe we're in a unique and strong position to leverage this technology, which we're already using with features like smart snippets or recommendations to provide real value to customers. And you're asking about applications. So for example, in commerce, our customer Caleres, you might know their shoe run if you're a shoe lover as I am, but Famous Footwear saw a 21% increase in revenue from our Coveo search. In customer service, on the other hand, our customer Medallia in healthcare has been able to put the right information to the right hands and therefore empowering tier 1 agents to handle 34% more cases on their own without escalating to tier 2. And they did not compromise on NPS. They also saw an increase in their NPS score while doing it. So I think it's kind of powerful examples of how AI can actually deliver business performance for customers of ours.
Sort of the Bings or Googles or Yahoo searches of the world are some of the first places people probably encounter algorithms or forms of AI in their sort of consuming life. Ryan, I wanted to ask you. You came to this sort of from the other side, in the sense that you worked on the problem side of this and then figured out how to apply AI to it. What was that problem that you identified, and why was AI sort of a solution for it?
For sure. And I mean, just to tie it in with the title of the talk, hype or disruption, I think if you're trying to solve a problem, you don't really have to rely on the hype. So, I mean, in our particular case, we don't bill Riskfuel as a AI company predominantly. I mean, except when I speak with VCs, that is. When, I mean, typically we think of ourselves as a trade and risk management software company. It just so happens that AI sits at the very core of what we do. And that is we make very accurate and performant copies of our customers, which happen to be banks and insurance companies, risk models. Those models are typically quite slow. We run their risk processes millions and millions of times to make a big training set, and then use that to train up a neural network. And then when the neural network's trained up, it can imitate the existing process, but do it much, much faster. Typically a million-fold sort of is the scale of increase that we deliver.
And so why? What was the pain point in your own working life that you thought?
Thanks for bringing that up, because I blanked on that part. I'm the sort of the typical user, at least in my past experience. I was a derivatives trader, so I would use these models to calculate whether I'd made or lost money that day, figure out whether what trades I wanted to do, whether the book had lots of risks that needed to be hedged, for example. And with the sort of prevailing setup at the time, I would get essentially a static report in the morning, and if it changed, if it was really volatile, I still wouldn't have any sort of updates. I'd just have to kind of fly blind from that map that I received first thing in the morning. So with the speed ups of a millionfold, now you can get real-time updates. So as I don't know, I think of March 2020 as sort of the proving ground. I mean, when the markets are going crazy, that's when you want up-to-date information as much as possible, and we can deliver
that. John, so as we've been discussing, generative AI is sort of the buzziest thing in the markets right now, and Microsoft has that key partnership with OpenAI. The model that the application that everyone has by now seen is one that you get to go out and sell, and obviously it does many other things than just that query response. So tell us a little bit about your last few weeks. I mean, you were saying Azure OpenAI has been your kind of whole life recently.
Oh, absolutely. And the buzz is really infectious to see all the potential use cases and potential uses. I think one of the things we need to remember is that this collaboration has been over multiple years and really just popped now. And the collaboration is looking at things like building new software, building the supercomputer to run AI, doing AI science, and as well democratizing AI. And that's the most exciting piece is taking these tools and putting them in the hands of individuals, and then putting a wrapper around them in Azure OpenAI. And what that provides is the guardrails, the same security, privacy, and responsible AI that people have been accustomed to. And we've had cities like City of Kelowna that has used it as a chatbot to improve the permitting process. We've had other organizations use it as a natural language translation to help them with their searches. And so really providing great capabilities to have these tools used easier than ever before and have that interaction with individuals in a more natural way.
And so, you mentioned a municipal example there. What other kinds of sectors, industries are you seeing?
Well, one of the most exciting ones that we saw here in Ontario was Ontario Power Generation that created Chat OPG. And what they do is they use the large language models to provide a natural language interaction with their employees so that they can get to resolution of internal documents far, far easier. And what's great about that solution is that the internal documents remain internal. They're not indexed by the large language model. It's simply the large language model is doing a translation to the local search agent and then feeding that back. And it really then speeds time to resolution or time to knowledge for employees. And so it's a great productivity gain.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about data sources and where the data comes from and who controls it in a second. But and I wanted to ask you. You mentioned a commerce example earlier, but are there industries or sectors that you're finding more or less receptive to this? And how does sort of the regulatory landscape play in? There are rules, sector-specific rules around data in some sectors. There are different risk appetites. What are you seeing?
Yeah, maybe twofold. So in terms of industry, what we're seeing, obviously in the US, the regulatory framework is sectorial. So we see trends per sectors, maybe HIPAA with medical data, for instance. But as a whole, I'd say like AI will be disruptive for all businesses. No enterprise will be immune in my mind. So we have obvious proof of that when the leaders are initiating the transformation. Think about Amazon or Netflix. But I think everyone either working in technology, manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, retail, financial services will need at some point to face the truth that it's going to be AI or die. So when we first launched Coveo, I won't be lying, the real market was early adopters, technology companies that were seeing the power of AI. So they were implementing this with their own teams, right? So think about Dell, Salesforce, Adobe. They've all bought a subscription to Coveo to make sure they would be able to leverage AI. And with the COVID pandemic, we saw the shift with people realizing that we have to offer a digital experience. And now with the generative AI, we really see that these advancements will create incredible opportunity for Coveo and all AI players out there that are mature enough to protect the data. And I think these are good points you're mentioning, Murad, and Ryan and John as well, on data privacy and the regulation and how you can gain the trust of your customers today. And that has certainly evolved. So yes, the regulatory framework has evolved. We saw some like sectoral regulation in the US, but more global trends in terms of GDPR, CCPA, what we've seen also with Bill C-27 in Canada, the act in Quebec as well. So many new regulations coming up, and draft of AI acts in Europe, but also in the US and in Canada as well. So we're seeing it everywhere, but I would say it's lagging in terms of where the companies are right now. So I think I totally kind of agree with what President Biden said last week about companies having a fundamental responsibility to make sure their products are safe before they are deployed and made public. And I think we all share this together on the panel today. Law is lagging, policy is behind. So, and it's evolving. So I think as executives, we have to make sure to be proactive and ahead of the parade to secure our customers' trust and users' privacy. So it's security by design, privacy by design, and by default as well, over and over again. So we do see a clear trend of like customers asking more questions. We used to say here at Coveo, like, hey, it's difficult to separate the customer from its money. And it's still true nowadays. But today, I would say it's even harder to separate the customer from its data. Rightfully so, right? Sometimes the data might be confidential. Most of the time, it might be personal or sensitive. So everything you have to build as a framework around data protection is taking resources and time. And nowadays, these resources, sophisticated experts in AI that understand the frameworks are not everywhere to be found, right? So we really have to be cognizant of this and build a risk-based approach to our approach to implementing an application with OpenAI, for instance, as we have to allow our business units to leverage AI. And if you just take a look at the regulation, you might be tempted not to do so. But I feel like people in my position where we have to give the green lights to project needs to be really creative these days with all that's happening right now.
Is it the case that more regulated industries are less open to adoption and that less regulated industries are more open to adoption? Like, is it that simple?
I could not say this on my side of the house. I really see some use cases driving the risk-based approach of every employee's industries depending on their sector. So for instance, we heard BMO talking about their implementation of AI. I think some data might be more sensitive to them, so they might be less willing to use AI on these data sets, but they might be super willing to use AI on public data or on the website or in specific other use cases. I would say the use case most of the time will drive the willingness of customers to adopt AI. And as I mentioned, I think it's just no industry is immune to having to adopt AI. So I'm not sure we're now seeing an official trend of having industry behind and some leading. I think they're all trying to do it. They all hear it from their board requesting more agility and deploying AI. They're hearing it from employees requesting these tools to be able to code much faster, to be able to translate much faster. So we have to do this despite the industry. I think every company has to do it, and the rules will need to be evolving and reevaluated, and we're seeing it in the field right now.
If I could jump in, though, I think because of this focus on privacy and security, Canadian business is really rethinking how they look at data. And there's some made in Canada innovations that they're leveraging in partnership with AI. And so talking about things like de-identified data and being able to do more with de-identified data across an organization. Differential privacy allows then data sets to be used in a more flexible way. And also there's this new emerging area called synthetic data, where you can take a real known health data set, run it through AI, and have a completely fictitious data set. Now, but that has the same characteristics of the original. Now, imagine the boon for health research if you have a data set that's completely fictitious and then you're able to look over. Finally, there's tools like confidential compute that allow you to reason over distributed data that remains encrypted at all times. And so these are brave new environments that are allowing us to do really, really fantastic things, and turning some of those traditional privacy security thoughts on their heads are allowing us to do more quickly because we've safeguarded the information.
I think I'll take the other side. This kind of feels like 1997 and everybody's running out to get a www in front of their domain name if they have a domain name. I mean, AI is obviously going to be huge, and this is just the beginning. But I think we're getting way out over our skis in terms of the immediate impacts and maybe underestimating the longer term impacts. Everybody now, I mean, the internet, the web, it's just sort of ingrained in us. Nobody thinks necessarily of, oh, we have to have a specific web plan. It's just your plan has to include it. I think AI is going to, right now, we're all thinking of as AI as some new thing that we have to address. 5 years out, I think it's just going to be part of the business period, and you're not going to be carving it out as something that you need to address. It's just going to be central to the way that we do things.
Yeah, and I've seen that in the industry as we have these AI conversations. What it's created is a far greater focus on data in an organization, and we see the resurgence of data governance officers within organizations that are looking at the business value of data across the multiple business lines, and then looking at privacy, security, responsible AI. How do you manage that across the organization? So I think that fits with your point quite well. It's, how do we use this asset or our assets to meet our strategy and our business outcomes.
Yeah, and maybe to keep talking about data a little bit here, because I think one of the, to the point Ryan's making, there's an interesting question about how AI gets defined, right? There's a regulatory question, and Bill C-27, for example, which Anne referenced, is it's a few different things, but one of the things that's in there is the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, which we've been writing a little bit about lately, and that has a specific definition or rather, there's a non-specific so far definition of high-impact systems that will be filled in later. But there is also a different piece of legislation in there that defines automated decision-making systems. How the EU AI Act defines it, how Bill 64 in Quebec defines it. There's not one uniform understanding of what this means. There are important distinctions between automated decision-making systems, sort of like, large language models, eventually sort of more general AI. So all of this is shaking out to some extent. But on the data question, and are your customers asking different questions about data than they were a few years ago? How are they approaching this topic?
Yeah, for sure. I think they're, well, like in general, everyone's more aware of AI and the risks associated with it, including the risk with the data. So they all heard that, like, beware when you're buying AI, it's going to be a black box. You don't really know what data will be used. All your data will be flow down to other like subprocessor and so on and so forth. So I think the customers' questions are becoming much more sophisticated nowadays, but I really see in the way they're asking the questions, they really want to understand for the project to work, because they see the business value of leveraging the application using AI instead of doing things manually. Obviously, some industries are still attached to the manual work. Think about like e-commerce. Some merchandisers still like to be able to boost manually a product versus trusting the algorithms, right? So we're seeing these two trends, but in terms of due diligence from customers, they're more extensive, I would say, and they understand better. Or if they don't understand better, they leverage the legal teams or procurement, the sales teams of other vendors to better understand it. So I really feel there's a hype around what we do. So people want to understand better because they get the pressure from their business units that want to use the tools. So yeah, the questions are more sophisticated, even about data. It's not just like, hey, where will you be hosting the data? It goes above this, and like they're asking like where the transfer are going to be taking place, who can really access the data, who's having the keys for the encryption, how do you pseudonymize the data, like these technical questions where you need to have like technical security experts to address are really becoming part of the day-to-day job for any vendors out there that want to put their solution up for sale.
So I just want to remind everyone to get your questions in early. They are being fed to me. We're going to start getting to them in a second. But I wanted to ask either Ryan or John, as you're going out and talking to potential customers, what questions are you getting about data?
Well, the conversation has changed a great deal in some cases, but other cases it remains very static. If we look 10 years ago at the big focus on open data and putting data out in the wild, very focused on tabular style data and static data. And so there are some patches and organizations that maintain that frame of reference. It's kind of that anchor bias. And so really trying to give people the nudge around looking at, little data versus big data. There's these thoughts that more data is often far better. And there's great emerging field of saying, what is the minimum amount of data that I need in order to do my decision making? There's misperceptions around, having to have highly accurate data. Really, if you have data that you've well defined, you can deal with dirty data. You can clean it and you can do other things with it. Streaming data is another one, real-time data. Like there's all these different aspects that people are now starting to understand. I'd agree that there's far more conversation around protection of data. Sometimes the privacy element overwhelms the conversation where there's no privacy concerns of the data, no PII or anything involved with it. And so trying to nudge people off of that consideration and looking at other aspects and characteristics can be a challenge. And so leveraging those new tools and new philosophies, principles really helps. One of the funny things that happens, and well, perhaps funny, not funny, haha, is that security and privacy have often acted as a gatekeeper to not sharing data across an organization. And so when you overcome the security and privacy blockers, then all of a sudden people get to look behind the covers and say, yeah, that data is not really that useful to us anyways. And so there's a great deal of work that needs to happen. And that's, again, where we see the resurgence of data governance, of really being able to make sense of the data and govern it across an organization.
You'd mentioned synthetic data, and that's certainly a solution to a lot of our specific problems. I mean, our customers don't want to be giving us access to their trade portfolio. So the ability to actually generate synthetic trades that we then train against is a very important part of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I think that there's also this interesting and growing question, you all sort of touched on it, of like, if you're a vendor, like Riskfuel is a vendor that sells to multiple banks, and I imagine that there's not one bank in there that's like, yeah, sure, use my trading data to help my competitors in this field. And I imagine, all of you are hearing that across your client bases of sort of like, well, do I really want to help like I want a good product, but I also don't necessarily want to help out my competitors or have them informed by the insights that you're generating for me.
Well, and that's the great thing about using the Azure OpenAI environment, is that you have that isolated environment. You own all the data that goes in, you own the data that comes out, and we don't train our models on your data. And so you have that comfort and security that your data is your data and only for you to use.
Okay, I wanna get into some of these audience questions. Maybe as a natural follow-on from this, Nicholas Van Velzen asks, how does the panel see companies partnering with third-party AI providers to help drive their adoption? And maybe if I can spin this a little bit, what does the sort of AI supply chain look like? Is it going to be third-party adoption? Is it going to be more in-house builds? Will it be assembling chunks in a sort of a chain? And how do you feel about that?
I feel it's going to be a chain, and it's going to increase the risk of the supply chain of the tech stack, right? And it's going to be like a big thing to be transparent about, like where the data will flow and how it's going to be treated by every single party. But I do believe that we're going to have to rely on some companies like Microsoft with OpenAI, Azure, that build some powerful foundation AI that we're going to be able to use and apply, like do application AI on, and then sell to the customer who's going to service end user. So to me, it's going to be a kind of a quite long chain where we're all going to have our own role, and it's going to work out only if we're aligned on like the risk allocation mechanism between every single person. So sometimes I think an issue with having to rely on third-party AI providers, customers will want to see them as insurance providers. Anything that would happen with my data or the output of your solution, you need to be representing that it's going to be 100% accurate, or there's never going to be a data breach. If ever there's a data breach, you're fully responsible for it. So all of these discussions, I think, will be brought up at a higher level, executive level, and people will want to have a view of their risk portfolio in terms of AI and data flow within companies. But I do believe we're going to have to rely on people that are doing this full time. I don't think you can compete with the companies that have 300 like AI scientists doing this, and you're like a manufacturer doing shoes, and now you want to have your own department of AI winning that competition. I think to me is maybe too much of a big bite for you to try to digest, and you should partner with people, engage the conversation, at least, and see and decide. But I think it's a different thing to develop AI technology versus doing what you used to be doing in your own enterprise. This being said, I do think everyone is going to need at some point some developers and AI developers.
That chain you're talking about, I completely agree, and it's really fascinating how much flux is going on. I mean, we're in that chain somewhere, and the people that supply us with tools like ML Ops, etc. I mean, every day there seems to be a new entrant with a new greater tool that will speed up our training processes, etc. That I think it's going to take a little bit of time, and then things will start to settle out. You mentioned about the shoe manufacturer having a AI team and stuff like that. I think I see that in the insurance and banking companies, where for sure there are going to be bits where it's best done in-house, but then there are going to be bits that are best done by the third-party providers. But we're still at that stage where some people think that doing AI at the shoe manufacturing company is the right way forward, just because it is also new and everybody's taking a stab at it.
Excuse me. One of the things that's pretty intriguing is when I was helping draft the Canadian National Standard on Ethical Design and Deployment of Automated Decision Systems, we had experts in the room, and it took us 3 or 4 meetings just to agree upon a taxonomy. And so when we start talking about AI, it's a continuum. We start right from data and analysts. There's mathematicians that are involved, and they're building out new models. We have people that take the math and develop software on top of the math. We have people that have the APIs. We have people developing APIs. We have people tuning. It's a huge continuum that we look at. And so there is plenty of room and opportunity for partners. Like Microsoft has over 15,000 partners in Canada that plug into that ecosystem. And I think as we start to look at those communities of how they fit together, there are going to be some independent software developers that create things, tuned models, perhaps to legal and policy AI or healthcare AI, like large language models for that, despite GPT-4 being exceptionally good out of the box to do that. There'll be other organizations that simply make use of that service out of the box. You know, I was talking with the Chamber of Commerce in Kitchener-Waterloo, so small Chamber of Commerce representing a lot of independent businesses, and they indicated that they didn't see AI helping them with their business. And I then shared with them that, do you use a wayfinding application? And they said, of course I do. That's the way I get to my customers in a speedy way. That's AI. Do you use autocomplete? Yes. That's AI. Do you use translation service? Yes, that's AI. And so we see this era of co-pilots coming in and co-pilots automating some of our jobs. Some early co-pilots in the software development era, you know, increasing productivity phenomenally by creating code for people. And so is that AI? Is that where we see people, you know, putting their heads down to be able to, you know, do that coding of the math behind the scenes? No, but it's still AI in implementation. And so there's going to be a variety of different solution providers there. The point's well made around allocation of responsibility. And we have to be really, really thoughtful that, look, one person's tool could be another person's weapon. And so, you know, we all use kitchen utensils. Those kitchen utensils help us in our day-to-day lives and nourish us as we go about our meals. But those kitchen utensils can also cut us. And so we have to be careful and put in place the right safeguards.
And so this is a great place to transition to talking about the sort of ethical and regulatory and risk piece of this. You know, if you're watching this event, you've probably seen these things, not least because you get our newsletter. But we've seen two sets of things happening simultaneously, and they're not unrelated. But one is, you know, a number of prominent individuals signing a number of letters that I've lost count of now, the number of open letters out there, but expressing either collectively or individually concerns about the risks of AI systems, particularly the speed of their evolution and the impacts that that might have around things like disinformation, around things like employment. So that is one set of things. And then you have sort of simultaneously, but not unrelatedly, regulatory action coming. You know, Anne listed off some things at the beginning, but in Canada, as we've said now, we have Bill C-27. There is an EU AI Act. The Biden administration is taking more active steps on this. All of this is happening simultaneously. I wanted to actually let the question, give the question to an audience member, which is Ruth Duekma-Beba, and I apologize if I mispronounced that. Does the panel think that in industry, you know, in the ways that you're encountering them, is mindful of these responsibilities, or are they focused on sort of the outcomes, the bottom line?
That's a great question. Perhaps I can jump in and then have the fellow panelists answer as well. Look, it's hard to imagine that Satya Nadella took over as CEO of the company of Microsoft some 9 years ago. And when he took over, he set a new path around data, cloud and AI first company. And he posited 6 AI principles. And this was because he believed that there's some areas of innovation where you can afford to break things. But in AI, it's so important that you take a thoughtful and deliberate approach that he instilled 6 principles in the company: inclusiveness, safety and reliability, privacy and security, fairness, accountability, and transparency. And he operationalized that across our teams. And so we've been doing that for the better part of 7 years, and we continue to increase our capacity there. I have the good fortune to be the responsible AI champ here in Canada, and I ensure that there are no AI implementations that we build that would go in and violate any of those principles. And so we provide guidance and direction. So we've instilled that into the very culture and framework of our company. That said, we know that this is something that we can't do alone. And so we work together with civil society in Canada, in the US, around the world to hear their concerns and considerations and put up guardrails in order to support that. We work with our customers, and I've helped many customers in Canada establish responsible AI governance structures, be they in retail, be they in financial services, military and law enforcement, so that they can build that out. And we're also encouraging governments to put in place risk-based, principle-based legislation. And so when we look at what's happening in government of Canada with Bill C-27, it's a great start. There are some definitions that could be solidified and improved. We'd also recognize that Treasury Board Secretariat in the federal government has long had directives on automated decision making and an automated decision impact assessment tool. And so Canada has given some thought to this and is leading in that direction. And we need to then help others build that out. And we can't stop. We need to continue to consider what's happening in this field and then solve some of those tough problems so that when experts come out and say, hey, there's a big concern around fakes, how do we solve for fakes? Waiting 6 months is going to allow the malicious actors to get a leg up and figure out new ways to thwart that. So we need to keep pace and accelerate to get ahead of them to find the safeguards and controls.
I think it's really about incentives. And so when I look at my customers, the downside of getting it wrong is so much worse than being a bit slow. So in terms of cautious adoption of AI at banks and insurance companies, you can bet that they're going to be cautious and stick to the letter of the law. The issue is with other actors that where they don't have that big downside. There's only upside, and they don't need to act with caution. I kind of think of the opportunity for people to, I think the technical term is put crap on the internet and stuff like that. You mean using generative AI to make bots that are 100 times more effective and stuff like that. I mean, that's going to happen because there are people out there that don't have the downsides, and they reap the upsides. In terms of our big institutional players, it's the other way around, and they'll be cautious.
Yeah, and I think on my side, I see it as a virtuous circle. If you care about your bottom line and you want to generate revenue, you have to care about what your customers are going to be caring about. So I don't think you can gain business in the enterprise industry today if you do not implement the OCDE privacy principles. And if you don't do more than what you're expected to, you have to get security certification. You have to make audits. You have to prove that you're not only saying that you think a cybersecurity attack can kill your company, that you're working towards preventing this from happening. And if it does happen, you're prepared to react quickly. So you're mitigating the risk to the data. So I really see if you're taking this seriously and investing in the right direction, it's going to bring you business. But if you don't do this and you're just pretending through policies being put online and stuff, I might be naive, but I really think it's going to hurt you much more than you think and quicker. And the people doing this won't be able to survive in the market where auditors will start auditing. So right now, the issue, I think, is that the law authorities don't really have the bandwidth to come and audit the enterprise. They're targeting the biggest, sorry about my people having to suffer and to go to that now, but like we're all going to go through that assessment at some point. So we better self-regulate ourselves and do more than what we should today to be prepared for the next wave. Like I remember preparing for the GDPR compliance in 2016 and it came into force in 2018. It was the best decision we could have made, right? So we always have to be ahead of the curve again and invest now for future needs.
And to that point, you could quite say it in so many words, but regulation is only effective if it's enforced. And I think one of the things, John, you were talking about the decision, the directive on automated decision making at TBS. That's the Treasury Board Secretariat, the federal department that sort of roughly speaking sets policy for a lot of other departments. It's kind of the internal policy shop of the government. And my colleague David Reevely has done actually a lot of great reporting on the fact that In fact, a lot of departments just weren't doing it. And the revisions to the framework were taking longer than expected. So I think there's an interesting, putting my reporter's hat on, we do spend a lot of time asking the question, like, sure, you've got laws on the books. Is anybody enforcing them? And I think that gets back to this question of, like, who are the actors in the ecosystem, and what capacity is there to do that? One question that I do want to ask that kind of comes off the letter writing, all the letter writing we've seen. And we are seeing some of these questions asked, particularly around things like bias. So, to this point, we've sort of assumed that you put AI out in the world, you try to mitigate the risk, you try to build it as responsibly as possible. But I guess one sort of question we haven't really asked is, like, should we build these systems? Are there risks that are so significant, either in terms of bias, and I'm not talking existential risk, right? Not X risk, not robots launching the nuclear missiles. I'm talking biased outcomes, people being harmed in financial or physical ways by simple decision-making, automated decision-making processes. Is there a threshold at which we say we simply do not build this system?
I think the answer is yes, and that's the reason why these laws are going to be enacted. They want to ban the first layer of, like, super critical initiatives that we don't want to see ever. Like, you don't want drones killing people. You don't want that. That's no. But afterwards, like, what do you do with high risk or critical risk automated decision making, right? And I think that's going to be, like, it's a tough discussion. I think it's going to be almost impossible to foresee all the use cases and decide what goes where. I think you have to identify common denominators that will drive the decisions of businesses deciding to implement this, and knowing what they're going to have to mitigate the risk. So anytime there is an automated decision made by a tool that will impact your immigration status, there's a human that will have to review it. I think these are the things we should see in the regulation, and they're already in there. But there's going to be more to it, I believe. And I don't know where we're going to draw the line of, like, this is crossing the line. It's just banned versus this is acceptable, but with a higher standard of safeguards around it. So for sure, to me, we need to ban some things, and we need to really frame others with the proper bells and whistle. And yeah.
I think it's important to have a principles-based approach, because we see some things that today aren't ready for prime time. And certainly, we've been outspoken around facial recognition and how it's not inclusive and fair across broad communities. Over time, will it get there? Potentially. I can't predict the future, but potentially we'll get to that point. And so we do need to have a principles-based approach where we can accommodate that. I think right now, this definition of what's high impact, what's low impact is always a challenge. Having reviewed multiple, dozens of cases, sensitive cases, there are some that you feel are straightforward and beneficial, only to have a gotcha. And I recall one particular situation where AI was put in place to recognize repeat visitors to a soup kitchen. And so the idea was that you could be encouraged to take advantage of some social benefits from governments if you were then seen to be coming back and forth. It turned out that some of the people that were frequenting the soup kitchen purposely fell out of society. They did not want to be identified. And so now we were denying, or the company was denying, the soup kitchen was denying consequential services, a hot bowl of soup, by re-identifying people. Is that a high impact use? Is that a low impact use? Would we have even seen that despite the benefit that's there? And so we need to have far more dialogue and conversation around what is it that we're exactly talking about, what's state of the art. And we have to really be careful for, putting too broad an outright ban on things. So, for example, the automated decision for weapons systems and that type of thing, I think there's opportunity to frame that and scale that properly. But I think there's other areas where it's kind of like, well, hey, if I'm doing sentiment analysis and I can understand someone's demeanor, are they happy? Are they sad? Is that ready for today or not? Not certain.
Okay, we have a lot of audience questions. This is fantastic engagement, so I want to make sure we get to some of them. Maybe this is moving back I don't know, it kind of bridges our supply chain question and what we're talking about now. Stephen Long asks, any thoughts on how ownership of AI and related technologies could impact income distribution gaps? Could AI be an issue that creates wealth and at the same time widens income gaps for those who don't own the technologies, or let's expand that to develop the technologies, obviously people employed in the industry. Given some of what we've heard about impacts on jobs, could this be a sort of a income gap widening technology?
I saw a hopeful thing going around the internet this past week where a Google engineer was saying Google and OpenAI didn't have the moat that people might expect them to have. The idea being that to train up these large language models just takes so much data, so much power, so much time, so many PhDs in AI that only a very small number of players are going to dominate the field. And the premise of this article written by the Google engineer is that they didn't have a moat because one of the large language models coming out of Facebook, basically the Llama model, had the weights available in the wild, and actually allowed people for about $100 to be able to make their own variants of these sorts of models. So I think the future is a little less hegemonic than I thought it was maybe a week ago. Certainly, it is the very best models are going to require these large teams, but I think there's actually going to be a cheap and cheerful version out there that can do an awful lot of things as well.
I will set myself a reminder to find $100 and start that AI company. Okay, I wanna ask this. Bill Hearn asked this question. I think it's interesting. I've been having some of these conversations in Ottawa of late. So the UK government recently published a paper titled "A Pro-Innovation Approach to AI Regulation." It proposes a regulatory approach that begins with existing regulators being both specifically directed and further enabled to address AI regulation within their areas of responsibility. So just to frame this, we have AI laws. Proposed AI laws that would apply to AI across sectors, but this is a regulatory approach that looks at AI applications by sector. What are your thoughts on the pros and cons of this approach?
There's pros and cons. So I think it's going to be a mix of having the typical like EU global approach versus US sectoral approach. And I think it's all going back to risk-based approach. If it allows us to be more specific to some fields, so the operators are more equipped to navigate and to build their businesses responsibly and to deal with the models and the data more responsibly, I'm all for it. I think it's going to be time consuming, and it's going to be like a big thing to deal with it at both levels. But like if it brings more clarity for the enterprises in the field and it allows users and individuals and citizens to be more protected, I think it's a good idea. One of the key, I think, concern with regulation is that our offer are global, right? So you offer this across the world, and then you have to have kind of a local compliance program, which does not really make sense if you don't have an army of experts. So how do you navigate through that landscape that is both global and sectorial and local, and how you reconcile all of this? So the approach is typically to take the gold standard and apply it across the board and do some tweaks here and there to make sure you comply with the biggest amount of regulations. But I think that's a good approach. I'm curious to see how it's going to evolve and how they're going to be able to encompass every like sectorial considerations and use cases. But I want to be hopeful with these approaches.
In my mind, the UK approach has established a principles-based approach, which is laudable, right? And so they really tied the innovation outcomes, its strategy, with the AI and created the principles. And certainly in Canada, we've seen where organizations tie their AI deployments to the mission of the organization. It's far more advantageous to the business than starting from the bottom and saying AI is potentially harmful and then putting all sorts of safeguards around it. So you really need to have that conversation. Having that overall government principle-based approach allows it to be flexibly implemented within each environment. And certainly we've seen challenges in the Canadian context around technologies that apply across sectors. And so you can imagine a wind turbine, a aircraft engine running the same tools for preventive maintenance, right? It's almost the same software developers behind it. And yet that's divided across two different departments and agencies. Imagine you're the industry provider that's built this out and having to deal through those regulations. Perhaps there's a health scenario as well because the software component is in the background for predictive maintenance and that. And so there's great care that needs to be taken to make sure there's no contradictions because organizations will have to deal across multiple agencies to be able to deliver those solutions. So principles-based approach helps with that, and then make sure that there's adoption with only minor tweaks throughout. And I think the point's very, very well made around international adoption. Let's not get too far ahead of what's happening internationally because that can close off both local grown products, but also the adoption of tools and techniques that are elsewhere.
All right. Well, we are fast running out of time because all of you are so fascinating to listen to. I keep forgetting to keep us on track. One last thing, I think this might be a good way to end off. So Jim Parsons asks, what is one thing that surprised each panel member about AI this year? That could be delight or disappointment. I'll let you choose. Maybe Ryan, let's start with you.
Well, I guess like everybody, I've had to give ChatGPT a tryout, and it's been hugely beneficial. But I did get into a conversation where I was asking it some sort of researchy questions, and it gave me some very specific answers. And I asked it to give me the summary of the paper that it was quoting from, and then it did that. And then I couldn't find the paper, and I looked it up. It had completely fabricated the entire conversation. The authors didn't exist. The paper didn't exist. And yet the idea that it was, I mean, I was asking, and the idea that it came up with the answer was phenomenal. But but when you wanted to get into some of the details, it had entirely fabricated all of them. So I don't know whether to be super impressed because I'm still interested in the idea it came up with, even though I can't actually figure out where it got the idea from.
You get to go and work out the proof now.
Exactly, maybe.
John, what surprised you this year?
You know, it was a very pleasant surprise. I have a colleague works out of our Quebec office, and he often finds himself translating English documents into Quebec French. And it's been taking him quite a long time to do that. He was able to use OpenAI in order to translate complex legal documents from the Quebec government from English into French and having letter perfect success with that. So much so that he sat down with his friend lawyers at the Department of Justice to go through, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And so it really then, in my mind, one, helped my friend's productivity, but two, helped demonstrate that these tools can be used across multiple geographies, multiple languages, and really improve the productivity. And so if you have a specific use case where you don't worry too much about fabrication, as the previous example, then these tools are absolutely exceptional.
Anne, I'll give you the last word here.
Yeah, tough to choose one. Three things. I'm a fool because I got the Pope thing. Wearing Balenciaga took me 2 weeks to know it was a fake. So I'm not immune to not understanding where the fake data is. But to be honest, my surprise is how fast we are at trusting algorithms. And key highlight is to be able to discuss these now exciting subject matters at home with people that are not in the tech industry. I think that made it mainstream. It's super interesting for people to have an actual opinion. Now they're using it. They're seeing the use cases and the value. But to be honest, I just remember the time where I stopped asking the directions to my dad when I was going somewhere and I started to trust the GPS. And I feel we're now exactly there. Like, oh, we're going to trust some algorithms now versus our own mind, maybe. So I guess it's my biggest surprise. I don't know who to trust now.
I think we all hope that the Pope is the kind of man that would wear that coat. But I think we also all have some homework, which is to go in to keep having these conversations. We love having conversations like this at The Logic. Thank you for joining us for this one today. Subscriber support means a lot to The Logic, and it allows us to continue producing in-depth journalism. If you're not already a subscriber, you can find a link to subscribe in the chat or visit The Logic's website. Thank you so much to the panel for being here with me today, Ryan Ferguson, John Weigelt, and Thériault. Thank you to the Logic's business team, who are fantastic, and on this event put up with more from me in terms of flightiness than they usually have to. I really appreciate them every day, particularly today. We have an exciting roster of both virtual and in-person subscriber exclusive events planned for 2023. We're also hosting an in-person panel discussion in Toronto on May 15th on the future of education in Canada. You can save your spot by RSVPing to events@thelogic.co. That's Monday. RSVP soon. On May 25th, we're hosting a virtual discussion on Canada's opportunity to become a world leader in building and exporting ORAN technology. You can find a link in the chat. And put a hold on your calendars for Monday, June 26th. We're hosting our first ever summit here in Toronto, where we're bringing together thought leaders and decision makers for a day of candid discussions about the companies, policies, and people driving transformational change in Canada and beyond. For those of you heading to Collision, make sure to join us a day early for this unmissable event. And keep your eyes on your inbox for all future event invites. Thank you again to our partner BMO for making this event possible, and to Raphael Schapiro for setting the stage for this conversation. Yeah, you can find The Logic on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, where I can vouch that the content is always fantastic. Thank you all for joining us, to our panelists, to our audience, to Rafe. Have a great day.